Welcome to the first episode of the 62 Who Knew podcast, the successor to the 62 Who Knew television show that was drawing up to 60, 70, 80,000 views per week. And why? Because our topics are the most relative and timely topics in the country right now. And that is preparing to have the highest quality life you possibly can in the latter parts of your life. So let's get very quickly. Are you proud of me, Matt? I did that in less than 15 seconds. You can leave that in, by the way. Let's very quickly get to introducing our guests who happen to be our national sponsors. First, we're going to introduce Cassandra Watson, the president of Platinum LTC Solutions, and also one of the top long-term care insurance producers in the country. And when I say top, I'm talking the top 2%. Thank you so much for being here, Cassandra. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. John Thomas, Director of National and Strategic Accounts for Amada Senior Care, one of the leading and highest quality in-home care companies in the country. We're so happy to have John here. And of course, the president and founder of Amada, Tafa Jefferson. So glad to have you. And of course, last but certainly not least, Mr. Matt McCann, who is the president and founder of LTC News, the largest single source of long-term care insurance and long-term care news in the country, not only for consumers, but for insurance professionals as well. And Matt is also in the top 2% of long-term care insurance producers in the country. If in fact my four guests are wondering how I came up with the order of how I was going to introduce people, it was youngest age to oldest age. Sorry, Matt, but that's just chronologically how it worked. Welcome to all of you. Just say a quick good morning to our audience. You're all tremendous people.
Good morning, Mike.
Be good evening.
That's right, depending on when people are. See, that's why we have you here. It's just, Matt is a former superstar radio disc jockey. You've heard of Howard Stern. Matt wasn't that popular, but still, he was very popular, okay? Let's get right into this because although this is the first episode of the podcast, it's really the 126th episode of 62 Who Knew. And we are going to cover the most timely and relevant topic in America today for people approaching their early 60s to right into their 70s, 80s, 90s, and yes, thanks to scientific and medical breakthroughs, their hundreds. And that is long-term care insurance and in-home care, the double-edged sword of living so much longer. And I'm going to start with Cassandra and Matt. There's this mystery behind long-term care insurance. I have been a participant in that industry as a speaker. We're going on 18 years now, and it has always mystified me to this day how the public still doesn't understand what long-term care insurance is. Matt, delve into that just a little. It's so important, yet so difficult to get that point across.
Well, I'll debate you just a little bit. In recent years, since the COVID years, many more Americans are aware of the problem of long-term care. We saw it play out on our TVs each and every day with some of the crazy things that happened, for instance, in New York State and other places in the country. And today, when we talk about long-term care planning, the people that tend to be raising their hands, trying to get more information tend to be people with older family members who are declining in health. So those are people in their 40s and 50s who are preparing for their retirement. But I think your overall point is really right on par. And I told a Senate committee one time that the biggest problem in long-term care planning is denial. And that is still the number one thing today. The thing that has changed is now people are pointing at each other. I'm looking at Tafa and saying, I'm not going to need long-term care, but that guy is. And he's looking at me, pointing at me, saying, I'm going to need care, but he's really healthy. That denial is the biggest obstacle in planning. And that is, I think, one of the things that as people in the retirement industry, so to speak, need to be to try to overcome.
I think that's a great point, Matt, but I would actually even take it one step further. I feel like it's an education gap younger. Think about everyone's always like, shouldn't there be a high school course on how to file your taxes? Right? Isn't this like relevant information we should all know? And I think when it comes to retirement and planning, people just grow up thinking, okay, I'm going to get a job. They're going to take care of all of my insurance needs. And then when I get old, Medicare and Medicaid pay for stuff, not understanding the difference between those two, not understanding really what that looks like and what the reality is. And so then what happens is they get to that 40, 50 mark that you mentioned. They start to see aging evidenced in their family. And they're like, what do you mean Medicare and Medicaid don't pay for this? And they've had jobs that didn't have long-term care insurance as an option. And then they find us. And we're reaching them in their 40s and 50s, but wouldn't it be great if they were aware and could at least kind of mentally think that this might be something worth doing when they're younger? So I think it's a myth.
I think it's an incredible point you just made, Cassandra. Now, John and Tafa, you deal with people when there is something wrong. You're called to their home. You walk in the front door. You're the heroes, because I've had to utilize long-term in-home care people for both my mom and dad that are no longer with us. And when you walked in the door, in-home care people are heroes. The relatives just get to take a very deep breath and take a sigh of, there's a professional here. Have you seen a difference? We'll start with Tafa because he's the boss. We'll start with Tafa. Have you seen a big difference since before COVID and after COVID of people saying, yes, we need help?
Yes, we've seen a significant shift. And a lot of this has to do with some of the issues Matt and Cassandra brought up. A lot of this is education, because when you poll seniors, they'll tell you everything's fine. I'm perfectly healthy. There's nothing to be concerned with, right? And that's kind of what we hear on a regular basis. But what we found is, especially in light of COVID, COVID taught us so much. The skilled nursing discharges have gone down. And what I mean from that is the discharges that happen from the hospital going to the skilled nursing facility have gone down. I mean, it's taken a nosedive. But what we've seen is this transition from the hospital has ramped up from hospital to home. And what we're finding is a lot of families are unprepared. But thankfully, the families who have long-term care insurance have a fighting chance. Approximately 87% of all discharges are now going from hospital straight to home. And that's a huge difference. That's a big jump, because traditionally, when you go into the hospital, you're getting discharged into community-based care facilities like a skilled nursing facility for rehab, etc. But now that Medicare doesn't have enough funds to pay for this aging population, we're seeing a lot of this migration go from the hospital straight into the home. And as we're speaking with the sons and daughters, they're thinking, maybe I should consider something like long-term care insurance. And we're getting access to this patient population. We're getting indirect access to this new group of individuals through this patient population. But a lot of it is at that age when they should be buying long-term care insurance. A lot of times they're just unaware. They don't realize that there's a product that's out there that can help them age in place. So,
Yeah, that one of the things that that a good friend of all of ours that was on the 62 Who Knew television show more than anyone, Mark Goldberg, has always said and pounded it into me, is that so many people think, and I hear it, well, long-term care insurance, that's that nursing home coverage, right? No, it's anti. I mean, Mark would get so emotional. It's anti-nursing home coverage. And John, if you would expand a little, directly, Tafa brought it up. What do you see as a difference in the quality of care or the quantity of care from people that are private pays as opposed to people that have long-term care insurance?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, Mike. And before I answer that question, I might just go back to a little bit and hit on something that Tafa said and Cassandra said. Planning and education is so important. I'll speak for maybe Cassandra and I's generation, where I at least will claim to be an elder millennial, right? And I know part of the show is we're talking about generations, and as an elder millennial, I fit into that sandwich generation, right? And so, I have kids. And caring for my kids, and I have aging parents and beginning to care for my parents. But I experienced in my family throughout COVID. I know, Matt, you talked about COVID a little bit. My grandfather, because of a lack of a planning, he ended up in a nursing home. He ended up in a Medicaid facility and passed away during COVID years, right? And we had that experience as a family of doing the drive-by by the window of the nursing home and missing out on his last moments. And so this was really an eye-opener for me, and I had conversations with a lot of my peers, right, that had similar experiences, and the conversation on planning, right, and an awareness of what can happen as we age really was far more part of the fabric of conversation, I think, even in younger generations. And so that was eye-opening, but as Tafa said, I think that we don't have the education. Right, the education isn't penetrating all of society, isn't penetrating all of generations, that there are affordable tools to plan for aging and plan for the continuum of care. And so it is so necessary. And I think this leads right into your question, Mike, that the outcome between a private pay or someone that has long-term care insurance, and just to define for many of the folks listening, there are some misconceptions, and I know we'll dive into this in the show, but broadly, government doesn't pay for care, right? Unless you are in poverty and you end up in Medicaid. But government doesn't pay for extended care. And so, if you need care and if you want to stay at home and age in place, likely you're going to have to pay out of pocket. Right, that's private pay, or if you have insurance can pay for that aging, right, and for you to receive care at home. And the outcome for folks that have insurance, right, is far better than those that are private paying. And the reason for that is that, if you have an insurance policy and that insurance is going to pay for care, you're more likely to get that care sooner. If you think about paying out of pocket and writing a check for 10 grand, 15 grand, in some cases, on the West Coast, let's say $20,000 plus a month for a caregiver to come into the home and care for you, right? If you think about striking that check, you're going to wait until it's too late. You're going to wait until you fall. You're going to wait until you have an accident. You're going to wait until you end up hospitalized and you have no choice but to bring in a caregiver. If you have an insurance policy, you're more likely to receive the kind of care that you need when it's appropriate, right? When you're starting to age, when your family starts to see that you need some care, right? And you're gonna exercise that insurance policy and get the care that you need so that you don't have that accident, so that you don't fall and break your hip or fall and break a knee, right, or an ankle, which is what we see all the time. And so the outcomes of folks that have long-term care insurance, or a planning vehicle, are so much better than those that are paying out of pocket. And that's the reality of how we manage our finances and the decision making that we make.
The truth. I know Matt and Cassandra, you want to say something about, jump on top of a lot of things that John just said.
Okay, I think there's a couple of things that we need to understand. First off, you do not have to be old to need long-term care. The youngest client I had go on claim was 27. I've got a couple of people in their 30s and 40s, including early onset Alzheimer's, on claim. So age by itself, it doesn't protect you. The advances in medical science means there's a good chance you're not going to die. And if you don't die and you don't recover, you're going to need extended care. Now, you may recover after 8 months, a year and a half, but age by itself does not mean you're not going to need extended care. And your health insurance, including Medicare for those 65 and older, only pay for short-term skilled care. The second thing is you do not have to be sick to need long-term care. You can just be old and frail. So a lot of times, and this goes back to what you were saying about people thinking about nursing home. And I think this is one of the objections. A consumer says, well, I don't want to go to a nursing home. Why would I get a product that pays for the nursing home? Because they kind of imagine long-term care is laying there in this nursing home. That's not a great quality of life, although there are very good nursing homes. Well, the point is, most long-term care is delivered outside of a nursing home. And you could just be old and frail, what we call standby assistance. You can still do things on your own, but that in-home caregiver can make sure that they're there to stand by to make sure that you are safe and you have a good quality of life. And I think we have to, all of us, consumers and people in the industry, need to broaden our concept of what long-term care is. It is not being old and laying in a nursing home. It could be, but often it's not.
One thing I wanted to touch on, because I was just, for a lot of people, unfortunately, it's trial by fire, right? They get to that point that, you know what, starts to hit the fan. They've got to kind of bootstrap it to figure out what they're going to do with their family member who needs the help. And everyone's running around like chickens with their heads cut off because it's a horrible, terrible situation and there was no groundwork. But one thing I think is interesting, and I know we're going to untangle some of the like personal histories that we've all had over the last several years as the show goes on. But John and Tafa mentioned that you can see costs for home care anywhere from like, 8 to 20,000 plus per month. And I've known Matt since I started in the industry for long-term care, which was a little over 10 years ago now.
She was 5 years old when she started.
Straight out of high school. Just kidding. So one thing that Matt always used to say that I take with me to this day is that he has policyholders who bought insurance back in the 1990s. They bought long-term care insurance. And what did they buy? They bought $50 a day. And then they, were fortunate enough to become elderly. They used the policies. That's only $1,500. That's only $1,500 a month. And they went on to use those policies, and the children of those policyholders came to Matt and said, I don't care, I just want $50 a day. And this is such a poignant thing because a lot of times we can get so wrapped up in trying to plan for that $20K a month expense that we forget how game-changing just a few $1,000s a month really would be in that situation. And so this is something I always try to remind myself because we're overexposed. You guys are too. We see those horrible, massive expense situations all the time. And we just have to remind ourselves, even if this person had a few $1,000s more per month, their outcome, the peace of mind for their family, the deep breaths that everybody gets to take are just so mind-blowing.
It's beyond description. We all agreed, obviously audience knows that not only these are our national sponsors for the podcast, but we're all friends. We all know each other's personal stories, and we don't want to take too much time on our first episode going over personal stories. But I'm going to ask you, Cassandra, to share yours, if you don't mind. What brought somebody your age, which is you have not only you're in the top 2% of the country, you have to be one of the youngest long-term care insurance top producers in the country. And I think it's well worth the audience hearing what brought you to this industry, besides the fact that your mother is a legend, but we'll go into that another time. But what brought you personally into it?
Well, I'm going to have to take the title of youngest for as long as it possibly lasts, because at some point it's not going to be true anymore. And then I'm going to cry and get Botox, but
we'll have a show on that. Let's do that. Maybe you do your Botox on air. Ooh, Anthony, can we do Botox on air?
Let's do it.
Oh yeah, we're there.
My story is actually very closely linked to my mom's story. She's a long-term care specialist. She's been doing it for about 15 years. I started 10 years ago when I was 25. And it's kind of a perfect storm of a story where my mom actually met Matt. So Matt's son and my brother played high school football together. So when I say I've known Matt for a long time, I've known Matt for a long time. And Matt kind of fortuitously made a comment to my mom, who was looking to, she had been a stay-at-home mom. She was looking to do something else. And she became a long-term care specialist. And I had a whole different idea for my life, a different career path. And all of a sudden I looked up a couple years out of college and I saw what my mom was doing. And I was like, it doesn't look so bad. I think I could do that. And for me, it's a perfect intersection between being a business owner and providing for people something that I think actually really makes a difference when they need it. And I truly believe that. And, we've seen it go the other way too often. John and Tafa, you guys certainly have, where people don't have insurance. And so here I am. And, more we can get into later. My father passed away when he was 59 from a long illness, right? So there's more there, but I think that's good for a first first look.
Yeah, and you don't want to cry on the first episode, I know.
I don't like to talk about myself, believe it or not.
No, I know you're one of the most brilliant young ladies. Is that proper to say? Because I'm old enough to be your father, so I think I'm allowed to say that. Not only a top producer in the long-term care insurance world, but a mom of three and just a caring. I mean, you're caring human beings. I think that's going to bond the five of us and make this podcast probably one of the most watched podcasts in the country. Believe it or not, you're not just guests hoping to get some business. Although we'll talk about that in a minute, but you are four of the most caring human beings I've ever met, and that's also kind of rare. I'm just going to say it in today's world where morals and ethics seem to be lacking a little. John and Tafa, how often do you see that it's the children, the sandwich generation like John, calling you and saying, I need help from mom and dad? Let's talk about the sandwich generation, because very few people do. They talk about the boomers and they talk about the millennials, but that sandwich generation that has children that are getting ready for college or maybe getting married and they're into sports and that's all a lot of money. And now suddenly mom and dad need your help. That is the sandwich generation. Are you seeing more of the sandwich generation saying, I need help?
Yeah, yes, Michael. In fact, more of the sandwich generation is what we're starting to see is they're starting to realize that they need to chip in. And because, if you think about it, there's only a little over 3.5 million caregivers that are out there who do this professionally, right? I mean, even though it's a non-professional, work, classified work, right? Being a caregiver, there's only so many caregivers that are out there. So as we receive phone calls, literally thousands of phone calls every day for care, we find that sometimes when families haven't prepared, they're having to pitch in. They're having to fill in on the weekends. They're having to fill in on the evening shifts, and they're having to make adjustments to their lifestyle in order to care for mom or dad. And again, as we talk about this aging demographic, more men are living longer. Life expectancy has been extended. Yeah, we're catching up, and so we're seeing not only the need for care having a major impact on a lot of American families, but just the exposure that families are starting to have. And when they realize that they're exposed, sometimes no plan was the plan, I say, because, if they haven't had an advisor, if they hadn't had a CPA or a legal team that had given mom or dad advice to, at least look at this or kick the tires, or sometimes this comes down through employer benefits. If they haven't been a part of a large employment group, they may not have had any exposure to this. But to answer your question, a lot of families are being adversely impacted as a result of an unforeseen healthcare event. And we get those calls every day.
John, I know you're out there doing special projects and doing things for Amada. What are you seeing? Again, you are the sandwich generation. You self described yourself as that. What are you seeing?
Yeah, Mike, it is a coordination of care for most of our clients. It's a coordination of care with family members, and that's the reality. I think Cassandra talked about long-term care planning with even a small plan, and a small plan can provide a couple of hours of care a day, and that's what we see very often, right? Because if you think about someone that's aging, it is progressive in nature for most individuals, right? Someone's aging and they're aging in place and they get to the point where they start to need a little bit of help. And generally that first line of defense is a family member. It's often a kid or a daughter, right? Primarily that is in the home, assisting mom or dad. And as that loved one ages, a professional caregiver can come in and help with some of the heavy lifting. Heavy lifting can be, bathing and dressing and some of the things that require a little bit of skilled training to do properly, to understand how to properly bathe and proper body mechanics of caring for an elderly person, right? And so we do a lot of that in coordination with family. And so that is a big part of what we do, and it's I think the reality of the future of care in this nation. Tafa mentioned the caregiver shortage. The government knows that there is a caregiver shortage. They're looking at multiple initiatives to address this shortage, whether it's incentivizing caregivers through government benefits, or even providing benefits to family caregivers. We're spearheading a government program, an experimental government program that CMS through Medicare is paying for respite for family caregivers because they understand family is providing care. And so, this conversation is, I think, in its beginning, even though long-term care has been around for 50 years as an insurance product, right? But I think it's still in its beginning because there's a lot more that has to be done in planning. There's a lot more planning from the government level and at the insurance level. And so, it'll be interesting to see what's next as we're kind of at this crux of baby boomers entering this age of care.
Point, we are still in the beginning stages or the infancy stages of this healthcare epidemic that's going to happen. And I think this first wave of exposure was brought on immediately with COVID, right? A lot of families that we work with, our business is very seasonal and it's very cyclical, meaning that we have cycles to our business when we get busy, and the seasons really impact, our the seniors that we serve in the homes. And so typically where we get just this mad rush of care is towards Q4 and Q1 of every year because families are at home visiting with their loved one. They're checking in on mom or dad and say, "Oh, Mom, you lost a little bit of weight here. Or Dad, you're not up and as mobile as you were several months ago." And so just that exposure to mom or dad gets the children thinking we need to, kind of, kick the tires on potentially getting some help here from mom or dad. So for years, our business has been consistent. But, what COVID taught us was that we, as an industry, we weren't prepared, right? We weren't living in reality. And I think our healthcare infrastructure was tested. Our hospital systems were tested. Families were tested. People had to take a hard look in the mirror and say, are we really prepared to deal with an unforeseen medical event? When you have hospitals not admitting patients who are really sick, or when you have scheduled appointments for very, very necessary procedures, and that's kicked off for 7 or 8, 10 months, a year, that can be catastrophic. And so, again, I think we learned so much, and we're just coming out of this mad rush from COVID. It really exposed some of the stress lines within the foundation of our healthcare system, which includes reimbursement, right? Because Medicare was not in a position to handle any of this. And so I think now that things are kind of settling down, families are realizing, hey, wow, that was scary. What are we going to do to address our needs going forward? And so I think as a healthcare provider, the timing's perfect for us because the more we can educate and the more we can get out there and show families that there is a solution. And again, we don't sell long-term care insurance. That's not what our company does, but we're so thankful and grateful to partner with agencies and experienced veterans in this space that do. Because when I'm able to refer a family member over and have that resource, it's incredibly helpful. So again, for us, our business has been pretty consistent, but that speed bump, if you will, really tested a lot of us. And I think that we've learned a lot, and I think that's going to help us to prepare for a lot of the needs kind of going forward as this aging population, continues to have a desire to stay in the home. By the way, a lot of our clientele, they prefer to stay in the home. A lot of families realize that maybe an assisted living is not the best place for mom or dad, or maybe I don't want to be there. So we're starting to have those discussions as well.
Matt, I know you want to say something. I can see it, but I want to say the analogy that you gave, Tafa, of the healthcare system, the home care system, the government, Medicare, Medicaid, and people were all tested during COVID. I don't mean the medical test, but the system was tested. And I'm of the opinion that every one of those tests failed. We just didn't do it right. And I don't blame. We try never to get political, so I'm not going to say it was this fault, it was that fault. It was the first time this great country ever really experienced something like this. I know we just, not only weren't we prepared, but I have to say the first 6 to 12 months, we miserably failed. Matt, you take it from there.
Well, it's not the first time. We failed with the Spanish flu, and there's been things throughout the centuries that us human beings fail at when it hasn't happened on a regular basis. But long-term care is certainly the...
You were around for all those other things. We weren't.
I believe, Mike, if we're going to be accurate, I think you're slightly more mature than I am. That just might be a rumor, but nonetheless...
People say being in the financial world ages you, but I don't think I look that bad for 32. Do you?
Well, yeah, for 82, for 82, you look great. But we talked a little bit about the government. I think it's a good time as we record this within the first few days of a new administration. There is not going to be a new federal program for long-term care anytime soon, nor will there probably ever be in most of our lifetimes, other than maybe Cassandra. And John, you're right. You're right there with you. Okay, there's just not the money that is there. However, the current administration is going to continue to support the tax incentives that there are for long-term care insurance and the federal state partnership program, which most of the states participate in. Individual states are looking to join the state of Washington in having some kind of state long-term care plan. It's very limited. For those that don't know, the state of Washington enacted, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, a program which basically provides $36,000 and change for long-term care in exchange for a contribution, which most of us call a tax. I call it the LTC tax. California was on track to go that route too. There's been some water poured on that program for a variety of reasons, even prior to the unfortunate fires in the state of California. New York seems to be stalling. Michigan seems to be stalling. Michigan state may still do something down the road. But the bottom line is if you're in your 40s, 50s, even in your 60s, and you're waiting for the government to be the answer for the consequences of aging, the answer is clear, and they've been telling us that formally since 1996, when President Clinton signed the original HIPAA Act. The federal government is not in a position to pay for everyone's long-term care outside of those who are financially challenged. That means the responsibility of long-term care planning is on you and it's on me. We have to plan for our own long-term care. Otherwise, the consequences will fall on adult children and your own personal income and assets. Don't think the government is going to come and be your rescuer. They will not. And it's just, that's the way it is. You can put your head in the sand, but just like you don't ignore your retirement planning, long-term care is part of retirement planning.
I'm glad you said it, and you said it much nicer than I would. If you're going to depend on the government to assist you with long-term care and quality of life, you're going to die unhappy.
There was that line from Ronald Reagan. What's that line? Good afternoon. I'm here. I'm from the government, and I'm here to help you.
I was just gonna say that. It's like the scariest phrase in the English language. From the government, here to help.
Yes, absolutely.
If you would, you touch on something that our viewers, I'm sure, are probably not aware of, which is a tax benefit for long-term care insurance. Could you expand on that, either you or Cassandra?
There are several tax incentives that are available for long-term care insurance. Number one, proceeds from a long-term care policy are always tax-free. So there is never a tax event in receiving benefits from a policy. However, if you self-fund long-term care, meaning you're going to write the check yourself, there are several tax problems with doing that. Now, unless you're paying for care out of income, you're going to liquidate a mutual fund, stock, bond. That is going to create a taxable event. So your long-term care is going to cost more because Uncle Sam and most of the states will have their hands out, and you're creating a taxable event. In addition, if you happen to be over 65, part of your Medicare premium, Part B and D, is based in part by your income. So if you increase your income by selling off assets, then your Medicare premiums are going up. So that's number one. Number two, premiums can be tax deductible under certain circumstances. If you itemize and have enough medical-related deductions, which is obviously difficult to do, or you have some kind of self-employment income. So if you have a small business, whether you're an independent contractor, you are an insurance agent, you're an independent whatever, you have a restaurant, whatever business it is, you have a tax deduction for your premium, and you can legally discriminate with long-term care insurance, meaning that if I own this company and I have 32 employees, I can buy a policy for me and not offer it to anyone else. You can't do that with other employer-based plans. So that's important. You can also reimburse premiums through a health savings account. So if you have an HSA, you're using pre-tax money to pay for those premiums.
So Tafa mentioned that Tafa, your and John's business is cyclical and seasonal. And it's interesting because our business model is we talk to people who request information about long-term care insurance. So every single person that we meet with has said, hey, I want to learn more about this. I want to figure out if it's for me. I just want to have a better understanding. And we also see some seasonal trends as well. And what's interesting is the holidays are a really big impetus for our business too, because exactly what you said, they go home, they spend time with mom and dad. They're like, this has been going on. What's going on? And then one of two things happens. They request information on behalf of the parent, or they request information from us on behalf of themselves. And so we have a little kind of comment is the holidays are very busy for us. And it's either, unfortunately, people who are looking for information who are already sick, or people who are looking for information who are very serious, because now they've got a lot on their plate. They've got a lot going on. And I just thought it was interesting because we experienced some of that same ebb and flow too. And you don't want to mess with serious people who have mom and dad and they want to get it figured out for themselves. But I think at a later podcast, we'll probably talk a lot about underwriting and how important that is. So requesting information from someone who's already needing the help doesn't help them from an insurance perspective. There's very few options out there for people who already need assistance.
Before I ask the next question, I do want to point out to our audience, please go to www.62whoknew.com. There are several links there. When you hit the link for long-term care insurance, you're going to see the professionalism that we're talking about today from Platinum Long-Term Care Solutions. In so many of shows like this that are trying to sell something, I'm not trying to sell anything, but we have as a sponsor the finest long-term care insurance agency in the country. And when you click for information, not to insult the 5 million insurance people out there, you're not getting Joe Blow that does life insurance, annuities, and that, hey, life insurance and annuities, we're going to have shows on that. Not that that's not important. You are going to get a Cassandra Watson, a Matt McCann. You're going to get one of the top long-term care insurance agents on the phone to speak with. If you click in-home care and go to our partner, Amada, you're getting a company that has got such a, I don't want to say boutique, because sometimes people take that wrong in today's world, but such a personal business model of caring for people that whether it's for yourself or your mom and dad, go to 62whoknew.com, click the links, and you'll be getting such professionals that I think you'll be very happy. But now I'm going to ask another question for all of you. And this is a rough one. This is a Kobayashi Maru. I'm not going to explain what a Kobayashi Maru right now is. I'll give you the short example, which is that it's a no-win scenario. For those of you that know what Kobayashi Maru is, we just picked up another 100,000 viewers because they're very loyal people. But
how do you spell that?
I don't know. K-O. Just say it into Google and you'll know. But the people that know who it is, you're my people. It's a no-win scenario. Are we in a no-win scenario in this country when statistically you cannot argue? More than half the people in this country are living paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes you see statistics of 75 and 80%. Long-term care insurance is not as expensive as the uneducated public thinks it is, but it's not that cheap. As inflation grows and population grows, what do we say to the masses that go, oh my God, I really want this? And I love the conversation I had with, Miss Watson or Mr. McCann, but I'm barely making it paycheck to paycheck. Are we in a no-win scenario? Or if we, what's going to bring premiums down, if at all, with longer lifespans? Is it more carriers? What's going to make it more acceptable, I hate to use this term, to Joe Lunchbox other than the elite? Whoever wants to jump into that, go.
Well, Mike, I'll jump in there. That's a tough question, but I think about aging and the conversations we have around the dinner table as family, right? And I think aging is a really tough topic to talk about. Believe it or not, I think it's harder for families to talk about aging than it is even death, right? You hear stories of celebrities like Prince who pass away without a will, and their assets are up in the air, and there's fighting, and have to figure out what happens there. But if families can't even talk about death, then they're not talking about planning for aging. And that's the reality. I think ARP has a good study where they said almost 2/3 of seniors didn't have a plan and hadn't talked to their kids about their wishes for care before they ended up in the situation where they needed care. So that's startling, right? And so you ask the question: is it a no-win? I think as Cassandra and Matt and Tafa, we all said throughout this conversation, we're going to be confronted over the next decade with aging. It's going to be in our face. That the reality is that we're going to have to talk about it. And so, I think it's rough right now, and in that folks aren't talking about it. We should be embracing aging. Mike, I think you and I were joking weeks ago where you said we're going to make aging sexy, right? I don't know. I'm going to credit you, Mike. I think you said it. Right. But that's true, right? That aging is going to be in our face. It's going to be part of the fabric of a lot more of our conversation. We're going to have to confront it. So I see it changing. I see it changing. That's my answer.
All right. Good. Matt and Cassandra, the law of supply and demand works whether you're talking about cupcakes, hamburgers, or insurance. There was a time when there was a ton of LTC carriers, and I know there was a time not too long ago that some major ones pulled out, like MetLife and people like that. I mean, it's names that are everyday names in every generation pulled out of LTC. Now they're coming back in. Would more carriers coming back in help control prices? I mean, McDonald's and Burger King have to control prices because of Wendy's, and it's every business. Will more carriers coming in help control this, or the fact that we are living so long, which is a topic into itself, more people are, what did you call it, Matt? You're the one that taught me this. They're on claim. They could be on claim for 30 years now. I mean, they could go on claim for 65, and at 95, they're still taking a check from the insurance company every month. Of course, that's going to affect expenses. But is there a way to get prices to come down for long-term care while going to a hospital? An aspirin is $100 and a box of tissues is $200. Is there any way?
Well, let me start, and Cassandra can follow up. First off, I'm going to debate you for just a moment. Long-term care insurance is not necessarily expensive. The perception that long-term care insurance is expensive is because there are so many financial advisors and untrained insurance agents that take a look. They go to the cost of care calculator. There's one on ltcnews.com, probably the most accurate in the country, but that's another story. And they say, well, gee, a nursing home costs, $11,250 a month today, and it's going to be $18,000 in 20 years. So they write up a policy that pays for that. They look at this huge premium and they say, oh, this is too expensive. At least I looked into it. I can't afford that. Most long-term care is not delivered in a nursing home. It's delivered at home, adult daycare, and assisted living. Most plan of cares, that's starting with home care, and Tafa and John can even pipe in onto this, is not 24/7. And the idea is to take a catastrophic situation and make it manageable. So most of us have these devices. I don't know how much you pay, but I think my bill is $100 and some at least a month. We can afford that, right? We afford a lot of things. And at least in my experience, the cost of the premium is not the reason someone doesn't take action. It's the level of, I don't really need to do this, that denial. But when someone like Cassandra or Marianne DeKing, or fill in the name of the top long-term care specialist, they actually know how to take a catastrophic situation and make it manageable because they know what the reality is. How does home care progress? It starts with standby assistance and goes to this and that, and we can design a plan that between your future Social Security check, maybe a pension if you have a pension, and your long-term care insurance pays for care without changing lifestyle or creating a burden on the rest of the family. And because long-term care insurance is custom designed, even a small policy can have tremendous financial impact and positive impact on the family. And we alluded to partnership a while ago. Didn't really define it, but there are in most states these partnership policies that provide additional dollar-for-dollar asset protection. So even a small policy can ensure access to quality care, can reduce the burden on the family, and even if you were to exhaust all the money from the policy, you're able to legally shelter part of your estate based on the amount of benefits paid out by the policy. So I think that's the thing, and that's why you have to talk to a specialist, because long-term care insurance is not necessarily expensive, and insurance companies didn't leave the industry because of lack of interest. They left the industry just like any industry that matures over time. How many gas station brands were there 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago? You can name the product. And eventually, over time, the successful ones take market share. The ones that weren't successful go away.
You see this exact, I don't want to interrupt, but you see this exact thing with disability insurance. Like you don't have people out there debating the merits of disability insurance because there are only 6 to 10 major providers of disability. You just get your disability policy and you move on. And so I do think that's a bit of an interesting thing that we've gotten into in this industry. Critics of the industry talking about how carriers have left and they come and gone, they come and go. That's par for the course with insurance products. For some reason, it's become a sticking point here. I want to make one other comment. I'm so sorry. To your direct question, Mike, I'm just one person. I think everyone here is super bright, and we could probably talk about what as a country needs to happen when it comes to long-term care and long-term care planning. But my job right now is to help as many people who health and financially qualify for the plan. And that financial qualification is actually under discussed. So to your question, Mike, that person who's paycheck to paycheck, if they don't own their home, if they don't have a retirement plan, they do need to spend their money elsewhere now. They need to get a Roth. They need to get, they need to get that element of their life in order. For people who own their home, for people who have a little bit of money left over every month, great. There are policies out there that we're going to find for you that are going to be affordable and they're going to take some of that pressure off. But people who are on Medicaid currently, right? That's a situation that we aren't equipped to be able to deal with the products that we have and the environment that we have. And so we just have to be upfront with people in those situations, and it's tough. But that's the reality of the matter now.
You hit the nail on the head, Cassandra. The people, that all live, let's just be real for a second. People that are living paycheck to paycheck in their 40s or 50s, one of their children joining Little League and they have to write a check for $500. That hurts. That's more than half of America today. But you're right in the fact that as the audience, or at least our 62 Who Knew audience, not the new people, know that mortgage banking is my background. And it's really, I won't say funny, but it's a theme throughout the country because I lend throughout the country that, we're living paycheck to paycheck. But when you take their mortgage application, which is probably as intrusive as one of your health applications, it's now up to 14 pages of mortgage application. It's absurd. You do see that, yes, they live paycheck to paycheck, but they have a $900 BMW payment. Well, maybe it's time to have a little bit less of a BMW payment. I'm not picking on BMW. Please don't let me get sued. And put the rest towards the future safety of your family. And again, it gets back to what you said, Cassandra, education, education, education. Tafa, I think you looked like you wanted to say something while Cassandra was talking.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think what's interesting is I looked up Kobayashi Maru, and I didn't watch a whole lot of Star Trek, but now I understand the quandary of a no-win situation. But, what's interesting is in my business, this is a no-brainer because I've been in both scenarios where I've been in the homes. I mean, tens of thousands of homes in the last 30 years I've been doing this, where we're sitting with the family and they've planned. They have, sometimes the policies are very, rich with benefits and features and etc. Sometimes they're really scaled back because that at that particular point in time, that's what the policyholder could afford. But I assure you, when what hits the fan, any reprieve, any kind of respite is so welcomed by the family members or the policyholders. I mean, it's literally a life vest that's thrown to a family that's in a terrible situation. We've been in that, yeah, we've been in that scenario, and we've been in the opposite scenario where families have no resources, they have no help, no aid, and unfortunately, the brunt of that falls on family members. And it's terrible what happens as a result of just the lack of planning, or the lack of education with families, they don't have this resource. And so for me, it's kind of a no-brainer. And I'm in the camp with Matt. When you take a look at what families could recoup out of these vehicles, these insurance vehicles, right? Be it long-term care insurance, life insurance, whatever. We've seen them all. The hybrids, that are really popular. When you do a comparative analysis and say, okay, you've been paying $2,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 a year for the last 4, 5, 10 years, and you're able to recoup $7,000 or $10,000 per month when you're on service, on claim, and the insurance carrier pays you out in full, and you recoup all of your premium. Then that's when the light bulb goes off with the family. Like, oh my gosh, this is like the best thing ever, right? And so I would say that this is a poor example for Kobayashi Maru, because it's not until you get on the other side of this and you see not only the financial benefit that happens as a result of having a product like long-term care insurance to save the families, but the stress and the burden that's relieved from the family. There's no amount of money, I don't care what the situation is, there's no amount of money that can pay for that. And when you're in a scenario where the patriarch of the family or the matriarch of the family is really in need, families will pay whatever because you can't put a price tag on that, right? So that's just my feedback. We've been in both scenarios, and I've felt so defeated and so helpless walking out of the home and telling the families, you know what, I'm so sorry, but you're on your own. Like there's no resource here. It's so heartbreaking, and it's really hard.
Well, believe it or not, we literally have 45 seconds left. This, as I knew it would, this hour just flew by, and there was so many things we didn't touch on. I am going to touch on one thing in 10 seconds. I already brought up the website, www.62 News. Talk to these professionals. There's also a link on that website for financing. We're all working on a project together right now. People don't realize if you're a homeowner, you have assets or liquidity available to you that you usually don't think of. Long-term care insurance premiums can be financed. So when you say, no, I can't, yes, you can. With the 10 seconds remaining, I want to thank all of you so much. Our second show is going to be our same guests, and we're going to cover so many more important things, and we're looking forward to our next episode. Thank you guys so much.